else having trouble with it or not.
Yeah, I'll do that here in a second after I finish the introduction. Well, let me do it right now.
Okay.
Hey, Ralph, could you send it here? Oh, wrong one. Yeah, so Fred is, sorry, I'm admitting somebody. Fred is pastoring in, like I said, in Newfoundland, been on faculty at Tyndale for 20 plus years. And he got his D-Min in preaching under Hadden Robinson at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. So he knows his stuff, I hope. No, he knows his stuff. And I'm going to leave it up to him. If everybody can mute their mics, that would be great. And only when we're in conversation. That way we don't get a lot of feedback of multiple voices in case there's background noise. Welcome, Kim. Kim's in my mentoring group in Church Renewal. So she's one of the non-PAOC, but we welcome her. And PAO.
Oh. Hi, Dal. Hi.
So everybody mute your mics if you don't mind. I'm going to give it over to Fred to start the process.
Sure.
Great. Thanks, Dale, and welcome everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm not using earbuds. I'm just talking kind of through the computer mic there. So what I'd like to do today, hopefully we can get through this. I want to, first of all, give you about 5 or 10 minutes on some preaching textbooks that you may be interested in. And then I'm going to look at the sermon template, and I'll put that up on the screen, and I can also share these handouts with you. And after we walk through the sermon template, then we're going to look at some principles of sermon outlines. And then the third segment, which will be probably the larger segment, should be the larger segment, we'll look at about 7 different ways to outline a sermon. And most of these ways will be based on a book that I'll show you in a moment. And I think the last one is kind of a bit of maybe a hybrid of some different forms that I put together myself. So that's kind of the format as we get started. And I will also say that Dale and I were talking about giving you an assignment where you would take one of the sermon forms and try to develop a sermon outline. And then 2 weeks from now, we would invite you to reconvene, and we would use the exercise as a learning process, and we would put you into breakout rooms where you could dialogue about what you've learned and some of the challenges you have, and then we would do some group dialogue as well. So if you're game for all that, we'll do that piece in about 2 weeks from today, but we'll talk about that near the end of today's session. All right, so I'm going to start with just a few minutes on some textbooks. So this is Biblical Preaching by Hadden Robinson. This is the #1 used and acclaimed textbook for expository preaching. And so I had the beautiful privilege of studying with Dr. Robinson at Gordon Conwell. And I started there in 96, graduated in 99. But here was the coolest thing ever, is that ever since 1999, our cohort has gotten together for a study week. And so we've kept going on learning about preaching and doing studies of books of the Bible, etc. And Dr. Robinson passed away, I think, about 3 years ago. And I attended his funeral. And his son, Tori Robinson, who's a pastor as well, he was in our cohort as well. So that's been it's been really great. In fact, Dr. Robinson and I taught a course together at Masters I think that was in 2002. I don't know if any of you were in that course or not. But anyway, Dr. Robinson, does anybody know his claim to fame? Oh, you got your mic all
other than he taught Fred Penney, other than that?
Yeah. So his claim to fame is the big idea. The big idea. And nobody explains what a big idea is and how to develop one and how to know that you have one better than Dr. Robinson. And I can say that with a fair degree of confidence. I'll talk about what a big idea is today as well. Okay, so that's a book there. Another book we're going to look at, another preacher we're going to look at later today is Fred Craddock. Anybody, just put your hand up if you've ever read or heard him preach. Okay, a couple of you. His claim to fame is narrative preaching. He taught at Candler Seminary. Candler University in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the third book I want to show you. It's called The 4 Pages of the Sermon by Paul Scott Wilson. So I studied with Paul at the Toronto School of Theology. I think he might be retired now, but he's a Canadian, probably the most prolific Canadian writer in the field of homiletics. And I highly recommend this book, The 4 Pages of the Sermon. I'm going to give you a sermon outline based on his format later today. And I want to show you a second book by Paul Wilson. And this book is a fantastic book. It's called Setting Words on Fire. And it talks about the relationship between preaching as teaching and preaching as proclamation. And I think you'll find this book very inspiring. It's not as maybe as practically orientated as this book, but a real complement to the 4 pages. So Setting Words on Fire talks about preaching as proclamation and how we've kind of lost some of the practice and appreciation for proclamation. All right, Tim Keller, excellent book. Everything Tim Keller writes is fantastic. And so his preaching book is really good. It's probably a bit more on the theological side as opposed to the practical side. But I'm going to be talking a bit about what Keller does with preaching. And I have to say he's made a real contribution to understanding the theology of preaching. And I think if you haven't read this book, I'd really recommend it. So that's Tim Keller. Now, how many of you have ever seen this book here, The Company of Preachers? Put your hand up if you've seen that one. Probably my most loved preaching book next to Dr. Robinson. But this book is an anthology of articles, sections or segments of articles by preachers, teachers, theologians throughout the entire history of the church. And it's just absolutely rich. So yeah, there's so much in here. It's hard to summarize it. Let me just give you a few names. So Gregory the Great is in here. Amos Wilder, Paul Ricoeur, John Cassian, Charles Finney, Martin Luther, Gardner Taylor, P.T. Forsyth, Phoebe Palmer, C.H. Dodd, Schleiermacher. There's just all kinds of good stuff in here. Company of Preachers. Darrell Johnson taught at Regent, The Glory of Preaching. Fantastic book, really theologically deep, and has a really, really good understanding of the theological and biblical basis of preaching. So I really like Darrell Johnson. If you ever heard him preach, he's a beautiful preacher. Very, very articulate. This book you may not have heard of, The Homiletical Plot by Eugene Lowry. and I'll give you a look at a sermon outline based on this book later today. Now, just for fun, you need to read this book, The Sermon Maker by Calvin Miller. I don't know if you've read anything by Calvin Miller, but he is an exquisite writer. And this book is so unique because what happens is on one side of the page, he gives you theological concepts based, focused around preaching. And on the other side of the page, he's doing this running narrative. It's a fictional story of a preacher who's kind of into a rut and needs to rediscover the joy and fun of preaching. And it's just such a beautiful book. It's only like 150 pages. The Archangel of Homiletics shows up in the preacher's study one day, and they have a talk about preaching. The Archangel of Homiletics is known as Sermoniel, okay? Just so you know. This one, you might recognize Andy Stanley, Preaching for a Change. Not as academically rigorous as some of the other books I've shown you, but you probably have been exposed to some of his preaching. And now here's a book that's not a preaching book, it's a communication book. And how many of you have read this book, Made to Stick? Okay. Made to Stick is, I use it in my preaching courses at Tyndale, but and it was recommended to me actually by Dr. Robinson. So we were at lunch one day, and I said to him, so any more, good preaching books that I need to be reading? He said, Fred, you should read this book called Made to Stick. And so the idea of Made to Stick is, so let's assume you have a big idea, but maybe that big idea isn't memorable. It isn't sticky. It's not really well crafted. Made to Stick teaches you to take a big idea and make it a sticky big idea that people will remember. Now, let me I don't want to overwhelm you with that thought, because finding exceptional, brilliant, sticky big ideas is easy to talk about and easy to describe, but not easy to do. But there are some things that we can learn about what that looks like and the shape it takes, and how the mind works. So that's how Made to Stick, that's what Made to Stick is all about. Okay, so now we're going to go to phase 2, and I'm going to go into a sermon template, and I'm going to hopefully share my screen effortlessly. All right, can everybody see that? Okay, so just hang on a second. I'm going to try to expand that screen. All right, so what I've got here is, it's a 2-page Word file, and I'm just going to scroll down and show you the second page is like the actual structure of the outline, but I want to walk through what I call the foundational elements first. So the first element here is, you can have a sermon title. That's pretty obvious. The sermon title may come to you early, it may come to you late. It's one of those maybe moments of inspiration. Then, of course, you need a text. And the text should be, if you want to preach an expository sermon, it should be what we call a unit of thought, a unit of thought. And so that might mean, the boundaries might start for your unit of thought. It might start in verse 12 and go to verse 17, or it might start in verse 1 and go to verse 42. It really depends, of course, on the unit of thought. But But the principle here is to have a complete unit of thought, not a fragment. So if the unit of thought is 20 verses and you're preaching on 12, you're preaching on a fragment. Also, if the unit of thought is 7 verses and you're preaching on 17 verses, you've got, one unit of thought and a fragment perhaps of another one. Okay, so setting the boundaries of your text are really important. And I've got a handout and some ways we can talk about what that looks like, but we won't be doing that today. All right, the next thing you look for is the big idea. And the big idea has two pieces to it. It has the subject and the complement. And when we combine the subject and the complement, now we have an idea. But the idea has, first of all, an exegetical stage, and then secondarily, a homiletical stage. So let me just unpack that a little bit. So exegetical subject. Now this is explained very, very well in Dr. Robinson's book, Biblical Preaching. So the subject is defined this way. What is the passage talking about? It's not yet, what do I, as the preacher, want to talk about? We're not at that stage yet. This is the exegetical stage. And so we're asking, so what is the passage talking about? And let me give you a few insights as to what that might look like. Number one, it's always in the form of a question. It's always in the form of a question. That's number one. Number two, it's never a single word. So your subject can never be hope. It can never be heaven. It can never be, salvation. So your subject can never be a single word. It must always be in the form of a question. And number three, there is only one exegetical subject in your passage. There is only one exegetical subject in your passage. Okay? Now, one more point on that is because it's a question, your subject will begin with one of the following, what we call the 6 faithful friends. Who, what, where, when, why, or how. Now, I find that the 2 that are most common will be why and how. Those are the 2 most common. But any of those 6 words can serve to begin. Who, what, where, when, why, or how. Okay? So that's the subject real quick. The complement is the answer to the question raised as the subject. So complement is now, what is the passage saying about the subject? Okay? Or to say it another way, what is the passage saying about what it's talking about? That might sound a little convoluted. So it's the answer to the question. That's the real simple way to teach it. So when I've taught in foreign countries and using a translator, words like subject and complement can be a little bit difficult to translate. So I basically use question and answer. What is the question raised in this passage? And what is the answer that the passage is giving to that question? All right, so now we combine subject and complement into one sentence. We just combine them, and we have now an exegetical idea. Now, an exegetical idea is not what I'm going to preach, because an exegetical idea is talking about things that are rooted in the biblical context. So if it's Paul and the Corinthians, it's an exegetical idea is, something that Paul is communicating to the Corinthian church. But I live in the 21st century and I have a church or an audience if I'm an itinerant preacher. So I've got to take the exegetical idea and I've got to shape it and reword it and craft it so that I hold on to the essence of the exegetical idea, but now modify the language so that it communicates to my listeners in my particular context. So making that transition from an exegetical idea to a homiletical idea is a pretty critical step. The language moves from, historical, for example, Paul said to the Corinthians, to more theological or pastoral. Theological language is timeless. Pastoral language or homiletical language is contemporary, speaking to my particular people and audience. Secondly, an exegetical idea can be long, and by long I mean it might be 12 to 15 words, whereas a homiletical idea should be concise. And in an ideal world, 6 to 8 words is plenty. So we're talking now about editing and finding the right way to craft that big idea because, we want it to stick. We want it to be memorable. And so I'm going to give you some examples of that as well. Now, the next element is...
Right, before you go on, there is a question in the chat.
Okay, can you read the question, Dale?
Why is there only one exegetical idea in a passage? Does that mean that one passage is only talking about one thing? Can you expand on that thought?
Okay, so what I said is there's only one exegetical subject, and that would lead us to follow that there's only one. Now, sorry, there can be, I forgot to mention this point, but there can be multiple complements. Okay, there can be multiple complements, but then you have essentially, yes, you have one exegetical idea. However, there's not simply one homiletical idea, because the homiletical idea is going to pay attention to your audience and your setting and what issues are on the table in the here and now. So when you're doing the exegesis of a passage, you're asking questions like, what is God trying to communicate in this passage? And there will be one core idea. Now, there will be supporting ideas. There will be complementary ideas, but I'd call them, sort of sub ideas. But there's one core idea, and you as the preacher, as you're studying the text, you need to come down to what is the core thought in this passage. Okay. Now let me just say, maybe you get that wrong, or I'll say it in a nicer way. Maybe 5 of us would sit down and read the same passage, and we might describe the big idea or the exegetical big idea a little differently. Okay, but here's what I would say to you. If we've done our study, we looked at the passage in its context, we looked at the grammar, the theology, the flow of the book, all of those things, we would be relatively close to each other. And the analogy we sometimes make is that of a dartboard. And you and I might not hit the bullseye every time, but we should at least be on the dartboard and hopefully close to the bullseye. So yeah, that's because part of what this is based on is authorial intent. What is the original author intending to say to the original audience? It's not a reader-centered approach to interpretation of Scripture, but it's an approach based on what's the original author intending to say in the original context. So I think, Dale, maybe I'll just continue if I can. Hopefully
go for it. There's no other questions in chat.
Okay. All right, so we're now looking at the sermon's big idea right here, and big image. Now, the big image here it's kind of an optional feature. And what I'm trying to indicate here is that if you can communicate your big idea through an image, okay? So let me give you a quick example. So let's say, you're talking about sharing the gospel. Maybe it's a Great Commission, passage. What would the sermon's big idea or a big image be? It may be a bridge. So let's say you were to describe, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, maybe how it was constructed. Maybe you'd even put a picture of it up on the screen. And you would refer to that back and forth throughout the sermon from time to time. That image of a bridge is very powerful, and it will communicate. So that's kind of what I mean by a big image. Now, sometimes you will find, in fact, quite often, you will find images in the biblical text. Okay? And I'm going to talk about one of those later, but if you can find, that passage in James, I think it's chapter 1, where he talks about looking into the mirror. The word of God is like holding up a mirror to yourself. That's an image. Okay. All right, let's move on. Main doctrine. So ask yourself this question. If I'm preaching on this passage, it may not be an entirely doctrinal sermon, but let's ask ourselves the question, what doctrine is embedded in this text? Is it something about the local church? So that would be ecclesiology. Something about the Holy Spirit? That'd be pneumatology, eschatology. And what happens now, once you identify that doctrine, you might say, I'm going to take a couple of minutes in my sermon to highlight something with respect to that doctrine. So maybe you're talking about the kingdom of God. Maybe you want to talk, almost dropping a footnote. I want to say something about, the already and the not yet aspects of the doctrine of the kingdom of God. Okay. So just highlighting this here in the foundational elements can help give your sermon attention to some theological aspects that you might otherwise gloss over or skip over. Okay. Now, the next item here is the sermon form. Now, later when we get into the sermon outlines, I'm going to give you, I think, about 7 or so different sermon forms. But here's the secret, if I can say it that way. There are really only 2 sermon forms. There's the deductive and the inductive. Now, some people could argue there's a third form, which is the hybrid, half inductive, half deductive. But for purposes of concepts, let me just describe to you a deductive and an inductive sermon are the 2 basic structures of how we communicate an idea. So if you look at movies are by their very nature inductive. If you read a novel is inductive. A documentary film, on the other hand, is deductive. A research paper, written, maybe a business plan, written to describe a business, and if it's financially viable, it's going to be very deductive. So these are the basic sermon forms. Now, How do you choose? Here's the rule of thumb. If the passage is deductive, the sermon form will be deductive most of the time. If the sermon form, if the biblical text is inductive, the sermon would be better served to be inductive. Okay? Now, approximately 70% of the Bible is narrative. So let's take the Old Testament. A lot of the history it's all inductive narrative. Book of Acts, the Gospels. You could make a case maybe that the Gospel of John is more deductive, but the Synoptic Gospels and the Book of Acts are narrative. Paul's letters, the epistles are all deductive. So then we have other forms, like we have the wisdom literature. I would argue it's deductive. We have the Psalms, which are poetry. That's largely, I would say, narrative, in a specialized form, poetry. So pay attention to the form of the text. So the form of the text should largely dictate the form of the sermon based on these two categories, inductive or deductive. All right, let's move on. Audience need. So you really need to spend some time asking this question. And the next item, sermon purpose, is obviously related to the need. So you're asking questions now like, well, what need do I want to address? So let's say during this pandemic of the last year, people are dealing with a lot of anxiety. Okay. So that's my need. I'm going to be talking about the stress, the anxiety, the uncertainty, the fear. Those are the needs I'm going to be addressing. And what's my purpose going to be? Well, my purpose is going to be to encourage, to calm people down, to give people a biblical perspective, to think about, the goodness of God and the care of God. So you can see need and purpose are two sides of the same coin. And I need to ask myself the question, what need am I addressing? And here's the rule of thumb, okay? If I don't address a need, people won't listen. So one time, not too many years ago now, we were in our preaching study week with Hadden Robinson, and we were working on this particular passage of scripture. And he says to me, he says, Fred, how would you start this sermon? And I thought, well, I'd say this and this and this and this. I think that's how I would start, right? He says, no. No. He says, you know what your problem is, Fred? He said, you're thinking like a preacher. But he said, you need to be thinking like a listener. And I thought, wow, like that's pretty important, isn't it? Think like a listener. So as pastors, we sometimes think as pastors, we might think as theologians, biblical scholars, experts in the Bible, but we really got to pay attention to the need of our listener. Okay, so sermon purpose, if I can articulate, something that goes like this. At the end of this sermon, I would like this to happen, or, to have happened, or this kind of change or shift in thinking to occur. So it can be an attitude, it can be an action, a behavior, it can be repentance, but what do I want to achieve with this sermon? Okay. All right, let's move down now to depravity factor. How are we doing for time, Dale? Probably got to pick this pace up. Depravity factor is
2:07, so whatever you need. I think we scheduled till 3, right?
Yep. Depravity factor it's the sinful part of the human condition that we need to fight against. So for example, let's say I'm preaching a sermon on forgiveness. The depravity factor is I don't want to forgive. I want to get even. So if I can identify that need for revenge, that need for, I don't want to forgive. I want to hold on to a grudge. Well, if I can identify that, now that is going to give me help. It's going to point me in a certain direction for illustrative material, for application. I may need to spend a few minutes just working on that depravity factor. Okay, so that's what that's about. The next item here is developmental question. So think about your big idea now, and there are only 3 things that you can do with your big idea. You can prove it to be true. You can explain how it works, and you can apply it to people's lives. Now, again, this developmental question is going to be the result of 2 things. The passage itself, what's the passage doing? So is the passage explaining? Then you're going to spend a fair bit of time explaining. And you're always going to be doing some application. But certain passages require more explanation. And certain passages, they're not complicated. They just require a lot of application. Okay? And then there are other passages where you need to prove this to be true. Now, I think a lot of people in the younger generation, those who are seeking for truth, seeking God, I think for many of them today, the question is it true? Is the Bible true? Are the claims of the gospel true? And so we want to be thinking about the skeptic, and we may need to give them some additional proof. So if you find yourself, hey, I'm spending way too much time on application, I might say to you, well, wait a minute. Maybe people don't even believe what you're saying. So maybe you want to spend some time proving it. Or maybe you want to explain it. Like people say, for example, God's in control. Well, that requires a fair bit of explaining in the face of all the suffering and sin and evil in the world. Okay, so developmental question. That's what that's about, and that's also in Dr. Robbins's book. Now, let me go quickly over this outline. And this outline is a generic outline, and I'll give you more detail on this when we get into the later segment today. So I always recommend that you start with the introduction, surface a need in your audience, and build a connection, build rapport. So that's where you try to get attention. Then you will transition to reading the text. So once you read the text, you can do this either before or after, but set it up a little bit. What's the context? Don't go into a lot of detail here, but a little bit of context will really help, I think. This is part of the explaining part and the proving part, because you're making the Bible, credible and believable here. You're not just assuming. And then there's a transition. I'm going to talk about transitions in a moment, but then we go to main point number 1. And I've got the word move here. David Buttrick wrote a book maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago now, called Homiletic Moves and Structures. It's a very thick, heavy book and hard to read, but he makes the case that we should not look at, the main pieces of our outline as points, because they can be kind of isolated and stand alone almost. That's part of the thing that you get, the sense that you get from a point. Whereas a move says, I'm here now and I'm going to go there, and then I'm going to go there, and then I'm going to go there. So it's got more of a sense of progression. It's more of a rhetorically aware way of describing what you're doing. Now, in the bracket here, I've said just a couple of things. Your main point or your first move should never be a fragment or a phrase. It should be a complete sentence, and I'll tell you why. A complete sentence forces you and I as preachers to think our way to clarity. A phrase or a fragment allows me to stay vague, and I might not be clear in my mind what I'm really saying. So a complete sentence forces me to think my way to clarity. Okay? Then we have subpoints. I may have one, I may have two, and then I'll have some support material, an illustration, a statistic, a quotation. And what I'm kind of looking for here is this. I'm looking for a cultural connection. Okay? Looking for something from, it could be from a celebrity, from a book, from a movie, from the news, what's going on in the world politically, economically, COVID, etc. But I'm looking for a cultural connection here. And then, transition, main point or move number 2. And I just write in here for a couple of little reminders, stay on the text. Don't expository preacher, you want to be preaching the text. But as you're writing these main moves, think about the listener, write for the ear. Okay. There may be, 1 or 2 subpoints, and you may be proving, explaining, or applying. There may be a second subpoint. This is all kind of conditioned by the text, of course. And then think about a cultural connection again. Now here's a transition statement. Here's an example. Okay, so here's my transition. So now we see in the gospel, in these verses we've just studied, we see this concept. But there's another issue to consider. Okay, so when I say there's another issue to consider, I'm trying to go deeper, and instead of you, the listener, saying, okay, this sermon is over, there's nothing more to say. Now I'm going to say there's more. And that's a way of keeping the listener interested, and also letting them know that we're going to be doing something else in the next phase or the next move. Okay. Now look at main point number 3 here. You'll see this. Maintain tension. If your sermon loses tension, in other words, there's no reason for me to keep listening. I might be thinking, you haven't said anything new. It's all cliches. It's all predictable. You haven't answered the question that's really, eating me up inside. Why? Where is God? What's going on? I don't understand. Unless you get into those questions, there's no reason for people to keep listening. So unless there's tension, people will tune you out. And in fact, the sermon is over. You might not know it. I might not know it, but people are they're done. So I've always got to be asking that question, am I maintaining tension in the sermon? Okay. Now, down here at the bottom, I've got the application. And application, you will know this, can be mingled into the main moves. I can do a little bit of application, move number 2 and a little bit more in move number 3. It doesn't have to be totally segregated, to late in the sermon as I've done it here. But you can do it this way, of course. And what we're asking in application is, what are the discipleship implications? And I want to do some exhortation. I want to persuade. I want to encourage people. I want to repeat my big idea. I'm going to repeat my big idea, up here. I'm going to repeat my big idea in the application, maybe twice. I'm going to repeat my big idea in the conclusion as well. So I want to get that big idea 4 or 5 times into the sermon so people really catch the big idea. Okay. Now, here's one thing I would strongly advise you not to do. Please do not practice application in the introduction. Application should be a result of exposition and explanation of the text. It shouldn't come before you teach, prove, explain. So make sure your application doesn't precede, the unpacking of the text. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop right there, Dale, for a second. Maybe we could take 5 minutes for a question. So what I would suggest maybe is everyone stay muted. And if you have a question, just unmute and ask your question, and we'll see how this might work.
Okay. One thing first, people were asking about that form. Can you email them to me? I'll share them via Dropbox link. So anything you're sharing on screen, if you don't mind emailing to me. And
yep, I'll do that when we're done. I won't do it.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yep. Okay. Anybody have a quick question? All right. Yeah, Rich.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Having wrestled with the inductive versus deductive question for years and listening to you teach before, and I took your week-long course once before, very stimulating. Here's my question. Maybe others in the room are wondering it themselves. In this post-Christian world we live in,
yep,
post-modern, described as post-truth, especially Canada, what merits do deductive sermons even have? Would we not be better for all of us to try to develop inductive preaching skills and emphasize stories and tell stories of changed lives in our preaching as much as possible, and develop the skills required for that type of approach to the scripture, considering the context we're in? That's my question.
Yeah.
My thinking out loud, a corollary to that is, if I was preaching every Sunday, I would try to be doing inductive Sunday mornings and deductive Sunday nights, only because maybe the midweek crowd would be more used to a deductive approach. Maybe it's the 50+ crowd at your church in a midweek who might be more used to that type of preaching, teaching. But I'm asking in a general sense how you feel about that, skills for the future in our nation, considering what we face. That's my question.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I don't know.
You may not have an excellent answer. I'm just saying, overall, that's my question.
Yeah. So let me try to give you maybe a little different way to think about this.
Okay.
You know how I kind of use the hybrid concept, somewhat deductive, somewhat inductive?
Yes.
One of the things that the postmodern listener really, really appreciates is authenticity and transparency. So even if you're using a deductive approach, you can use stories, personal stories, as illustrative material in your introduction, for example. But people who, the postmodern listener, while they have an interesting concept of truth, when they come to church, they do appreciate the preacher taking the scriptures seriously. So we can't, in a sense, soft sell the scriptures. I wouldn't be in favor of that approach. Yeah, I don't think that's what you were suggesting, Rich, but I just want to say that, you know. And the other part I mentioned is, you know, pay attention to the form of the passage itself.
No, thank you. Just a general question that I have. I've been trying to work on my storytelling techniques.
Yeah.
And yes, in deductive, like I said, if you have the midweek crowd and you want to have a deductive approach using Paul's letters, that's
Yeah.
the genre that bodes well with deductive, as you did say.
Yeah.
And you can fill that midweek Bible study with some good illustrations,
Yeah.
as you have explained. I
Yeah.
just find that people aren't interested anymore in having something proven to be true. Like in this post-truth world we're in, which is a horrible thing to say, but that's how we've been described. Like, you watch the news, you watch the internet, you read threads, everyone's just arguing about everything. You could come up with a textbook answer for an issue, and everyone says, "Oh, that's very nice that you think that." Somebody over here thinks something totally different, and they've explained
Yeah.
it well also.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, wherever we land, we have to be aware of how we preach inductive versus deductive. The people are being bombarded all week long with data.
Yeah. So let me just make a couple of quick comments, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah.
Abstract theological concepts need to be made concrete, and they need to be made personal. So if you get up and talk about justification by faith and you keep it as a theological concept, I'd say as a preacher, you haven't done your job. You've got to make it come alive. You've got to make it real. You've got to illustrate it. You've got to tell a story. And it might even be your own story or some aspect of it. The second thing I would say is, even in Paul's letters, there are narrative elements. So let's take Romans. Okay. What do we know about the church to whom that letter is written? They have a story. The Jews had been expelled from Rome in AD 49, and a few years later they returned to the church, and when they got there, they found out that the Gentiles were running the place. And so now the Jews and the Gentiles had to learn how to get along in the church in Rome. That's a historical narrative fact that that gives us part of the backdrop of the book of Romans. Paul was raising money for his mission to Spain. That's part of the book of Romans. The author of the book of Romans is Paul of Tarsus, Saul of Tarsus. He has a conversion story. He's been in prison. He's planted churches. You know, he's been on the go, being chased by people trying to kill him. So there's lots and lots of narrative elements around the author and the church to whom it's written, and the history surrounding all of that. So bringing in some of those narrative elements, even into a book like Romans or Galatians, will help you. Okay. All right. So now I'm gonna skip the second piece I was gonna do on some principles of sermon outline. I'm gonna go right to the sermon outline forms, and let me just try to share my screen again, Dale. No, that's the wrong one. Hang on a second. Here we go. All right, so I've got about 18 slides here, and let's see. when I share the screen, I have difficulty seeing any of your faces, and that makes this really artificial. So I've got a few of you showing up on my screen now, so pay attention because I can see you. Okay, so sermon outline forms. Here's a preliminary slide. I need to change that. Hang on one second. That's better. All right. All sermons should be expository, based on a single passage of scripture. All sermons should be gospel focused. God's good news provides the theological foundation for the sermon. All sermons should have one clear, big gospel idea. And all sermon outlines should adhere to the same basic principles of clarity of thought. Okay. So here's the basic expository deductive sermon form, and Hadden Robinson is, well known for this approach. Okay. So here's your definition. Oops, sorry, touch the screen. A single big idea is presented early in the sermon, which is then proved, explained, and or applied. We have a subject, what is the passage talking about? A complement, what is the passage saying about the subject? Exegetical idea, homiletical idea, and then we go to the introduction. A need is surfaced, and a gospel idea is presented. Okay, and then we basically go through a very matter-of-fact, logical, teaching, formatted outline. Point 1, point 2, point 3, application, conclusion. Okay, so that's pretty common, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with this. And I'm going to give you an example. So this is 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 5 to 17. Okay, here's the subject. How does Paul instruct the Corinthians to build the church? And here's the complement. Build upon the foundation of Christ using high quality material. So here's my exegetical idea. Paul encourages the Corinthians to build the church on the foundation of Christ using the highest quality materials. Now notice the transition to my homiletical idea. Christ gave his best to the church. Let's give our best. You see the difference. Now, let me just count the words for us. In the exegetical idea, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I have 18 words in the exegetical idea. Now let's count the words in the homiletical idea. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Still a bit long. It can be shortened even more than that. Okay. So if I took out, to the church, I could say Christ gave his best. Let's give our best. Okay. I think that's 8 words now. So you see how that becomes easier for me as a preacher to communicate. It's a shorter, more concise sentence, and it's easy for you as a listener to catch and to remember. Okay. So now I'm going to show you the outline of this sermon. If you want to grab a Bible and just follow along, what I'm trying to show you here basically is how I've treated the text quite carefully. I've tried to cover the text thoroughly. So I'm going to show you now it won't be a full outline, but it's got the main moves. Okay.
Is this the old or new No, I'm joking.
Okay, here's the introduction. And I haven't described what I would do there. But this sermon is using the image, and the image comes out of the text itself of a building project. Okay. And so my first point is God is the architect of the church. Okay. Now the word architect obviously is not in the passage. So I think this first point, and you can look at verses 5 and 6. Let me just open my Bible. Verse 5 and 6, you see that phrase there, the Lord has assigned to each his task. God is making it grow. You see those statements there in verses 5 and 6. So I've made a bit of a theological statement here. God is the architect of the church. And then you'll notice I go down to verse 11. Before I go to verse 10, in point 3, I go to verse 11. And this is because I'm using that building metaphor. So I can take the verses out of sequence if I want to, for communication benefit. So here I've said now, point 2, Christ is the foundation of the church. That's obviously there in verse 11. And then I go back to verse 10. Paul says, by the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder. So I've said now in point number 3, God raises up expert builders of the church, pastors. Okay. Now, point number 4, we are fellow workers in the construction of the church. And you'll look at verses 12 to 14. Anyone builds on this foundation, their work will be shown for what it is. It will be revealed with fire to test the quality of each person's work. Okay? So that's the fellow workers. Now we go to point number 5. And I'm going back primarily now to verse 12. And verse 12 says, we can use gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, and straw. Okay. So what's going on here? So gold, silver, and precious stones are expensive and non-combustible, whereas wood, hay, and straw are inexpensive and very combustible. Okay. So the point Paul's making here is, are we going to use gold or straw to build the church? So point 5 is God is asking for our best work to be given for his church. Okay, number 6. One day the inspector is coming to examine our work, verses 13 to 15. The day will bring it to light. The fire will test the quality of each person's work. Okay. And then point 7. Now, not a lot of sermons have 7 points, but this one does because that's what the passage is demanding. Verse 16 and 17, you are God's temple, God's spirit dwells in you. If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. God's temple is sacred. So there's a security system for the church. Okay. So you can see this outline. I'm talking about, I'm trying to stay very close to the text. I'm trying to put it in language that people will understand. I'm not using historical language, Paul and the Corinthians, even though I will talk about Paul and the Corinthians, but I'm putting it in the present context, of our church and all of us investing in our church. So when I get down to application, will you give your best for the church? I might say, for example, maybe you're an usher. What does it look like to be an excellent usher? Well, maybe it means showing up early, smiling, being patient, going the extra mile, being really attentive, being a good listener. I kind of unpack some of that. Okay. So that's your basic deductive sermon form. Dale, do you want to take a question at this point, or I'll take a 30-second
Sure.
breather.
So the whole idea of a 3-point sermon or 4-point sermon that we learned at Bible college isn't necessarily, it's whatever the text brings out, not necessarily any mode or method that's going to be pre-prescribed.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say so.
So my question actually has to do with the example here. And in this example, you're using 12 verses, Dr. Penney.
Yep.
And, out of that, we're getting 7 distinct points. Why would I not chunk this differently, drop one sermon with verses 5 and 6, and then do a follow-up sermon verses 10 to 12, and then 13 to 15 as a third sermon?
Yeah, I guess that's a personal choice, Rob. Yeah. There's a lot of material here, granted. But I have a big idea I want to communicate, right? And yeah, if I you could go either way on that. I think it's a personal choice. Yeah.
So
you do have to factor in how many minutes you have available to you as a preacher. Like I would normally preach in about the 30-minute range. If I was doing this in 12 minutes, it wouldn't work, right? It'd be too fast. I'd have to skip a lot.
So getting the sections of scripture, or how you've separated this out, you don't necessarily use the pericope that's the editors of whatever version you're using have used. You find the biblical separations. Is that what you're doing, or?
That's what I hope I'm doing. Yes. Now, obviously, Rob, was it Rob that said this or somebody else? When you get to verse 5, right? Chapter 3, verse 5, he's obviously in the middle of something here, because he says, after all, what is Apollos? So actually chapters 1 to 4 of this letter form a whole unit on dealing with division in the church. So what he's saying here about building the local church is actually embedded in a larger section about, let's get along, let's all work together, let's all contribute. So I would want to touch on some of that in the context and, in the body of the sermon. So I haven't given you everything here.
So this would be a sub message within a sub-subject within a larger subject, I guess.
Well, it's just part of the context, I think, that helps people understand, what Paul's thinking and how he got to this place. Yeah. All right, can we move on? Okay, so now we're going to look at an inductive sermon form. And Fred Craddock is written a number of books on inductive preaching. So here's the definition. A sermon is presented in a storytelling mode. An idea, the biblical idea or the preaching idea, emerges near the last 1/3 of the sermon as the narrative develops. So you don't give away your big idea at the beginning or even in the first half. You're building toward it. Okay. So we basically follow storytelling. Now, what I've got here for the introduction, a need may be presented, or curiosity aroused, and description of something is arousing interest in people. You could actually, in an inductive sermon, you could actually skip that piece if you're really good. I wouldn't just say skip it always and never go there. If you're a really good inductive preacher, you could skip, the introduction. And Craddock says, for example, that the short story is a close cousin of the narrative sermon. And one of the features of a short story is you just jump right into it and you grab attention with a well-described scene. Okay. And great words. Okay, so now here's the three key elements of a narrative. Number one, situation. Or you can also put in here the word problem. Problem. Okay? A scene and its characters are described, and a problem is presented. Okay? Now, notice the two things I've identified here. The scene, so where is it? Is it, in Jerusalem? Is it at the temple? Is it on the Sea of Galilee? Where is it? The more descriptive I can be in painting a picture of that scene, the more interesting the sermon will be. So I want to paint a picture of the scene, and I want to paint a picture to describe the people or the main characters. So I want to be creative and I want to be descriptive. Okay. Now, when it comes to painting a picture, use the five senses. And here are the five senses. You all know them: taste, touch, sight, sound, and smell. If you can use those five senses to describe the scene and the characters, that will add color and arouse interest. So that's really important part of storytelling. Okay. Now, the second phase of a narrative is the complication. Oh, well, we thought we had a problem, but turns out the problem is even bigger than we thought. Something else has come to light, and yeah, the tension has just gotten more intense. It's more complex. New issues have now emerged. Okay. And then the resolution. The resolution tells us God's presence and power brings redemption. And now the big idea, the gospel truth, emerges. Now, just like the introduction piece can be optional, shocker, here's the shocker. The application can also be optional at this point. And again, this is really dependent on how good you are. Like, in other words, if you're a really, really good storyteller and you communicate your big idea really well, the application is obvious, and for me to say anything more would be redundant. Okay. Now, not all of us, can do that all the time. So when in doubt, have some application and that'll help you and your listeners. Okay. So let me give you an example. All right. This is Acts chapter 3. Peter and John go up to the temple to pray, and there's a man at the temple gate. And the situation is, this man is crippled. So Peter and John walk up to this man and they say, what I have, I give you. In the name of Jesus, rise up and walk. Now, let me just refresh my memory for a second here. I want to find the passage because you're going to notice something here that might trip you up. Okay. This man is healed in verses 6 and 7. Okay. Now, but notice my passage. My passage goes down to verse 17. Okay. So the problem or the situation is, well, the man's crippled. He's a beggar. And you might think that the resolution is the healing. The resolution is not the healing. I'll try to explain why. So in the first part of the sermon, like the situation piece, he gets healed. So now what do I do? Is the sermon over? So now I've got to look for the complication. Now here's the cool thing about sermon formation, sermon form like this, a narrative form. Here's the cool thing. Even if I don't realize there's a complication, the form tells me there is a complication. So go look for it. Go find it. So when I start looking for this complication, I start reading. I might start reading some commentaries. I'm going to read the passage again. I'm going to be digging. I'm looking now for the complication. Let me go back and, for example, it says in verse 2 that he was lame from birth. And he was put there. This is the fascinating verse now, right? He was put there every day to beg. Now let's go over to chapter 4, verse 22, and you'll discover something pretty shocking, right? That he's 40 years old. Okay? And we'll go down and go back to chapter 3, verse 10. And it says there that everybody recognized him as the man who used to beg at the temple. All right, so let me paint the picture. He's been lame from birth. He's at the temple every day. Everybody recognized him. And he's 40 years old. Do you see the complication? Now, here's the nature of narrative. It doesn't tell you what the complication is. You've got to read between the lines and figure it out. Here's the complication. Why wasn't this man healed yesterday? Why wasn't this man healed, a year ago, maybe when, shocker, okay. Did Jesus walk past this man? Like, as soon as you say that, you got some serious tension going on. in this sermon. You got some serious tension going on now. This is a major complication. Now, if you preach this passage deductively, there's a good chance you would miss that reality, that tension in the passage. And so with a narrative passage, you've got to read between the lines. Okay. So now let's go to the resolution. And the resolution is, so what happened? How did this happen? What's going on in the passage? And so now I kind of make a theological statement here. And I say, Peter and John were prompted by the Holy Spirit. Peter, go over and tell that man to get up and walk. It could not have been Peter's idea. It had to be the prompting of the Holy Spirit. But here's the interesting thing. The Holy Spirit is not mentioned in this passage. Okay? So I am making theological analysis and theological conclusions as I read this passage. So now I give you my big idea. Healing happens when God speaks and his people obey. So now once I've let that big idea come to the surface, now I might want to add another story. Someone I prayed for that didn't get healed, and then maybe someone, that did get healed, and what happened? What was the difference? What was the role of the Holy Spirit, etc. Okay. So I could build my theological statement now using James 5, where James talks about the prayer offered in faith. And I could say that's exactly what's going on here. It's not the prayer of hope, but it's the prayer of faith. It's the prayer that God tells us to pray. I could quote Jesus, in John 8:28, who says, I do nothing on my own. I only do what the Father tells me. Then I'm going to circle back to my big idea. Healing happens when God speaks and his people obey. Therefore, here's some more application now. We need to be good listeners. We need to be abiding in Christ, abiding in the vine, so that we are in communion with him and we are hearing and responding to his promptings. Okay? So that's kind of how that gets applied. All right, Dale, I'm just going to stop there for a moment and see if there's a comment or a question.
Okay, so far, nothing in chat that I see, but if anybody has questions, let us know. Again, all these PowerPoints and whatnot will be made available after the fact for anybody that's wondering. I'll upload the video to YouTube and then put links in the YouTube video to let people know where to download the files. Anybody have a question?
Dale, could we just ask, maybe we were going to finish, I think, at 4:30 my time.
Yeah. What was it? 4:30? Okay, so another half hour. Yeah. Give or take half hour.
Another 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Oh yeah, I forgot you're not. Yeah, another 4 minutes. What were you gonna ask?
How are people for sticking around for another 20 minutes or so?
Everybody okay with that? We can, if you're not and you have to leave, the recording will be made available. So
yeah.
There's that. Ralph Juthman's asking in chat, Fred, when preaching an inductive or deductive, would you read the whole passage in a narrative?
Often not. What I'll likely do is read the opening scene, because narrative passages can be extremely long. So I would read enough just to set it up, and then I would cycle back into the passage when necessary.
Gabriel's asking if you should leave his email. Gabriel, are you part of the POC NL pastors group? Just respond it. Yeah, I'll post the links there. We have one person that's not part of that, and I will I have her contact, so I'll email her separately.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to move into the next sermon form now. Okay, can you see that, Dale? 4 pages of the sermon?
Yes, I can. Not sure if you see
Okay.
me. But...
Okay, great. So this is based on the textbook I showed you at the top called The 4 Pages of the Sermon by Paul Wilson. So here's the definition. 4 pages for 4 days of preparation. The sermon is rooted in grace and connected to the needs of the church and the world at large. He identifies in the book 6 key elements, which will sound similar to what I was doing earlier. Text, theme, his theme here is equivalent to the big idea. Doctrine, need, image, and mission. Mission is like application, of course. Okay, so here are the 4 pages. Page 1, trouble in the world. Trouble is a word here referring to sin, sinfulness, corruption, evil, poverty, war, broken relationships, etc. Trouble in the world. Page 2 is trouble in the Bible. Page 3 is grace in the Bible. And page 4 is grace in the world. Okay. So let me just move to an example quickly now. So here's the passage from James chapter 3. This is the passage, if you want to just flip over in your Bible, but I'm sure you probably all know it. It's about the tongue, how deadly the tongue is, etc. Okay, so here's the outline. Trouble in the world. People hurt other people with their words every day. Give me an example. Give me maybe 2 examples, or give me an example of something I might have done, or someone else. So that kind of sets it up. Trouble in the world. Somebody said something and they got themselves fired, or they created all kinds of trouble for themselves and their relationships. Now we'll go to page 2, which is trouble in the Bible. And here I'm going to unpack the verses 5 to 8. And let me just read it quickly for you. Tongue is a fire, a world of evil. It corrupts the whole person, and it's set on fire by hell. Okay, so that's, and I can obviously illustrate that. I can connect it to other parts of the Bible if I want to, but I'm just taking that passage from James and talking about how troublesome and sinful the tongue is. And, no one can tame the tongue. And there's quite a bit there in the passage. Okay. Now, grace in the Bible. Now, let me just point out 1 or 2 things about this passage that are quite interesting. In this passage, Jesus is not mentioned. The Holy Spirit is not mentioned. The cross is not mentioned. We have 1 or 2 brief references to God, God's likeness. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father. I mean, those are the only references to the Lord in this passage. Okay, so So what we've got to do here, because we've got this 4-page outline, we have to find grace, or the gospel. Grace here is another word for gospel. Okay. So here are the grace points. Number 1, people are made in God's image. He says that in verse 9. And he also says in verse 9, we use our tongue in a good way. We use it to praise God. And then he says down in verse 11, can fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? So I've taken the grace point there as this. Fresh water comes from a fresh spring. Okay, here we go now, theology. Good speech comes from a good heart, a heart that is changed by the gospel. So that is my big idea. And it comes now in page 3. Good speech comes from a good heart, a heart that's been changed by the gospel. Again, it's not obvious in this passage. In fact, it's quite hidden. But the sermon outline format tells me I've got to find grace, or I've got to find the gospel in this passage. So it's either explicit or implicit. In this passage, it's implicit. And it's my job as the preacher to make it explicit. Okay? So then we just go to page 4, grace in the world. As we go, from gathered worship into the world, let's use our words to encourage, to inspire people, to bless people, bless our families, to share the gospel. And of course, at this point, I can illustrate, I can give you a for instance, etc. So one of the benefits of this approach is it's very balanced. It forces me, if you will, if I need encouragement, it forces me to find the gospel, find the grace. So the sermon cannot simply be human effort. Like, just try harder to control your speech. It's very obvious that you cannot say that here, because the passage itself says you can't tame the tongue. You can tame a lion, but you can't tame your tongue. So it's no good for me as a preacher to get up and try to tell people, go ahead now, tame your tongue, because the passage says you can't. So what the passage really does is it tells me I need God's help. The gospel has to come and transform my heart, so that the words that come out of my inner man, are grace, are inspired, changed by the gospel. Okay. All right, Dale, I think I'll just keep going and go into the next one. All right, so this is Andy Stanley now. And the book is called Communicating for Change, which I held up earlier. You got to give the guy credit. I mean, he's a masterful communicator. To the comments made earlier about, the postmodern context, etc. I mean, he's found a way to communicate to the postmodern listener. So he begins with, all right, see you, man. Jason, can you give me a bottle of water at the fridge, please? Sorry about that. Just give me a moment. Just throw it.
Was it getting dry?
Yeah, it's getting dry. Dry preacher. And that went down the wrong way. So here's his structure here. Me, he starts with himself, and then we, and then God, and then you, and then we. Okay? So he always begins with self-disclosure, transparency. And what he's doing, of course, is he's trying to build a bridge. He's trying to connect with his listeners. And once he talks about himself, then he talks about, you're just like me. I mean, you can identify. I'm sure you understand. We're not that different. So now he's got you on board. And so now he goes into the Bible. Okay, this is the part where he's a bit weak on, what do we do now? And so I rely on other books and other methodology. Obviously, Dr. Robinson and Craddock and Wilson help us here quite a bit. Stanley is a bit thin on this one, but then he goes into the you section. What about your life now needs to change? What is God saying to you through his word? And then he brings it back to the community. What is our mission as a church, etc. Okay, so let me see if I can show you an example here. This is Hebrews 12. Okay. Since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, throw off everything that hinders, run with perseverance the race marked out for us. You know the passage. So here's the next section. Sometimes I get distracted and I waste opportunities to represent Christ. Then I can do that and this, or I can do one or the other. But I wouldn't use the marathon runner myself in the me section unless in fact I am a marathon runner. Okay, so the me section has to be something that I am personally experiencing or have experienced. It's a bit of transparency time. And then the we section is, maybe you have too. You've also been distracted and you've maybe wasted opportunities to pray with people, encourage people, share the gospel with people, invite them to church, small group, whatever, those kinds of things. So then we go into the God section, and I would set it up this way. The book of Hebrews deals with a discouraged church. And I would take these 4 points here from the sermon, from the passage, and this would be a lot of the substance of the sermon now. That'd be the majority of my time would be spent here in the Bible passage. Others have gone before us, the great cloud of witnesses. Throw off things that slow us down. There's a typo right there. Slow us down. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus. And Jesus endured the cross. We also can endure, suffering. It's a call to commitment. And here's the you section. What is God asking you to throw off or to pick up? And now this is where my big idea would come in. Focus on Jesus and finish the race, or focus on Jesus and you will finish the race. That's my big idea. Now, let me just pause there for a moment. Notice I'm trying to use a little bit of alliteration here for sticky advantage. So focus and finish. Okay, so focus on Jesus and you will finish the race. And that is obviously in the passage. It's a big image, the image of a runner. And then I go into the we section. What is God asking us as a church to stop or to start? For example, we have an opportunity, ... Okay. So that's Andy Stanley. All right, let's go to,
There is a question, Fred.
okay.
Terry Grimes asked, can you speak of the aspect, or sorry, to the aspect of finding or obtaining the big idea? Is there a difference between a message and a sermon?
Sorry, can you repeat the question from the top?
Sure. Can you speak to the aspect of finding or obtaining the big idea? Is there a difference between a message and a sermon?
I would say that they're kind of two sides of the same coin. So in other words, the sermon, might be what we would be doing in the study of the text, understanding the theology, the context, and then the message is all of that with a particular focus and application to my particular church and context. What do you think, Terry?
Well, I'm sitting here after 47 years of pastoring and thinking, boy, have I got a lot to learn. The challenge of remaining fresh and speaking to your congregation, certainly from the perspective of, do you have if you have a congregation of it's entirely seniors, you're not going to be talking to them necessarily about football, et cetera, et cetera. Yep. But what am I going to say as each Sunday rolls around? And I have Sunday morning, I have Sunday evening, I have Tuesday night Bible study, I have devotional on the internet. Finding what it is that I feel the Lord wants me to say, I guess, is the challenge that I was presenting. I hear a lot about, and really, really appreciate all these various aspects of communication of that sermon or communication of that message, but the actual acquiring of sitting down and saying, Lord, what is it you want me to say to these people?
Yeah, but that's your job, and that's my job individually, right?
Yes.
I'm giving you some structure, or at least options for how to structure your message, but obviously the substance and the content has to be yours.
For sure.
Yeah.
And the information that you're sharing with us is greatly appreciated. Well done. Go for it.
Okay. I notice we've lost a bunch of people, so maybe what I'll do, Dale, is we'll just take, maybe just a few more minutes. Let's see what we can do here. So this is Eugene Lowry, the homiletical plot. Now, notice the word plot. That's a clue that he's using the inductive method. So basically, this is going to follow a narrative approach, okay? And this might sound a little bit abstract, but it might be of interest to some of you. So the oops is like the problem, right? What's wrong? Something is wrong. The balance, the equilibrium of life has been upset. Okay. And the ugh, like, oh my goodness, the more I look at this, the more problematic it is, the more gap there is between, reality and God's will. And aha is like, wait a minute, there's some hope. Let's look for what God might be saying. And this we is like, that's the good news. That's where there's joy, there's a breakthrough, where we experience the gospel. And the is like the hallelujah, anticipating the consequences. Life is going to be better now, and it's going to be better for everybody. So that's all good. All right. Now I don't have an example of that one. I'm going to give you one more, and then I'm going to stop. And this is the first person narrative. Okay. Now, the first person narrative, the sermon follows a narrative development with an expository commitment. So we have the same basic structure of a narrative: situation, complication, resolution, application. Character description and development are essential. But here's the key thing now. The preacher takes on the role of a central character in the text. Here's the caution. There should be sufficient information in the text to develop a sound theological expository idea. So what's my idea? What's my purpose? Okay, fine. Now here's an example for us. So Easter is coming, Good Friday. Have you ever thought of taking on the character of Pilate and telling the story of the crucifixion from the perspective of Pilate? Okay, here's the situation. I'm the Roman governor. You know, I'm here in Judea. We've got to keep the peace. There's a lot of demands upon me by the Jews, you know, to assassinate Jesus of Nazareth. And by the way, I have my career to think about. Okay. Okay. Complication. Well, yeah, the Jews want me to kill him, but I can find no cause. He's innocent. Furthermore, my wife had a dream, and my wife warned me to not harm this man. And then we get into the trial and the dialogue and the back and forth with the trial. And then here's the resolution. I did crucify Jesus. I ordered his crucifixion. But now there are rumors of him being alive. And I use the word rumors here because it's Pilate who's saying this. And then here's the application, you know, what will you do with Jesus? Crucify him or confess him as Lord? Okay. Have any of you ever preached a first person sermon? Okay. Hadden Robinson's son, Tori, who was in my class at Gordon Conwell, he wrote a book on the subject. It's called It's All in How You Tell It. It's All in How You Tell It. And yeah, it's a good book. You can read that if you're interested. I've done a number of them over the years, and I find when I take on that approach and get into that headspace, if you will, it's the most different experience of preaching that I've ever had. I mean, you know, we preachers try not to be too preachy, right? But when you do first person preaching, it's definitely not preachy. It doesn't even, in a sense, have the feel of a sermon in some cases. So anyway, whether that's a positive or a negative, it's up to you. But yeah, so Dale, I'm gonna stop there for today. And what we'll do, Dale, is I'll email you the files.
Yeah.
And when you email them out to the people, let them know that we would want to try to meet again in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So the 18th at the same time. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
3 o'clock on the 18th.
Yeah,
And then we'll do
Newfoundland time, 1:30 Eastern time, and whatever other time it is in other parts of the province or country. I've texted you my email address, so you can send those to me, Fred, and I will put them on the POC NL pastors form. The link to, I'm going to upload this to YouTube, so it's going to be there, and I will email the links to a Dropbox where you can download the files from. So that way I don't have to email them to 30 people or whatnot. And I'll put that in also the Dropbox link in the description of the YouTube video. So they'll always be there. So I have way more enough room in my Dropbox account to keep them there. Good. Anybody have any final parting questions before we log off?
Not a question, just a great big thank you for time well spent. It's been a great afternoon.
Yeah. And Right Honorable Reverend Dr. Terry Grimes, say hello to your lovely wife and children for me.
Will do.
All right.
I would say, Fred, the preaching outlines, they're like the skeleton, and you've got to have the guts to make the sermon.
Exactly. Good metaphor or a good pun.
Good image.
Hey, Fred, I would like to say that I didn't know that you could do the entire seminary preaching class in 2 hours, but decent attempt.
Good to see you, Rob.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Yeah, we all get credit at Tyndale.
Yeah. Didn't even cost you $1,300 either.
17 if it's the I think it's 17 if it's the oh wait, no, that's McMaster. It's 1,700 for me. That's right. So maybe it's 13 at Tyndale. So.
All right. Well, have a great Sunday, everyone.
Oh, how are you?
God bless everyone.